Kicked aside at my daughter's table, I came with receipts and an ultimatum. One reveal, and the man who mocked me might be cut off for good. The silence at Sunday dinner had become unbearable. My son-in-law Marcus would answer direct questions with nods or single-word responses, his eyes fixed on his plate like I was some unwelcome stranger who'd wandered into their dining room. 3 months of this treatment, and my daughter Sarah just sat there, pretending everything was normal while her husband treated me like I didn't exist. But what Marcus didn't know was that I'd been planning something that would change everything between us forever. You won't believe what happened when I finally revealed the contents of my will. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The fork scraped against ceramic as I cut another piece of Sarah's pot roast, the sound amplifying in the uncomfortable quiet that had settled over their mahogany dining table. This wasn't how family dinners were supposed to feel. This wasn't the warm gathering I'd imagined when Sarah first brought Marcus home 5 years ago, back when he'd call me Dad, and actually meant it. I cleared my throat and tried again. Marcus, how's the new project at the firm going? The one you mentioned last month about the Henderson account. He didn't even look up. Fine. Sarah's knife paused mid-cut through her carrots. She glanced between us with that same worried expression I'd been seeing for weeks now, like she was watching a slow-motion car accident and couldn't figure out how to stop it. The Henderson project, I pressed on, determined to break through whatever wall Marcus had built between us. Didn't you say they were looking at expanding their downtown offices? Marcus finally raised his eyes from his plate, but the look he gave me could have frozen water. It's handled, Richard. We don't need to discuss it. The dismissal hit me like a slap. 6 months ago, this same man had been asking my advice about commercial real estate deals, picking my brain about property values and investment strategies. I'd spent 35 years building my construction business from nothing, and Marcus had genuinely seemed interested in learning from my experience. Now he acted like my opinions were worthless background noise. Sarah set down her fork with deliberate care. Dad was just asking about work, honey. He's interested in what you're doing. I can speak for myself, Marcus replied, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. I don't need anyone explaining my conversations to me. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah's face went pale, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just about me anymore. Marcus was being disrespectful to his own wife, and all because he couldn't stand the sight of me. Of course you can, I said quietly, setting down my own fork. I was just wondering what I'd done to deserve this treatment, son. The word son hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Marcus's jaw tightened visibly, his hands clenching around his utensils. Don't call me that, he said, his voice low and dangerous. We're not family. You're Sarah's father, nothing more. The words hit me harder than any physical blow could have. 3 years of calling me Dad at holidays and birthdays, 3 years of asking for advice about everything from career moves to home repairs, 3 years of what I'd thought was genuine affection. All of it apparently meant nothing. Sarah gasped audibly. Marcus, you can't talk to my father like that. I'll talk to him however I want in my own house, Marcus snapped back. He's a guest here, not the head of the household. Guest. After everything I'd done for them, after all the support I'd provided when Marcus was between jobs last year, after co-signing their mortgage when the bank had doubts about his credit score, I was nothing more than an unwelcome guest in their eyes. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush the life out of the room. Sarah stared at her husband like she'd never seen him before, tears beginning to form in the corners of her eyes. Marcus returned to his dinner as if nothing had happened, cutting his meat with mechanical precision. I pushed back from the table slowly, my chair scraping against their hardwood floors. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. Well, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I think I've lost my appetite. Sarah started to stand. Dad, please don't go. We can work this out. But Marcus didn't even look up from his plate. Yeah, Richard, don't let the door hit you on the way out. That was it. The final straw that broke whatever patience I had left. I'd been trying for months to figure out what had changed, what I'd done wrong to earn this level of contempt from a man I'd welcomed into our family with open arms. But standing there in their dining room, watching Marcus dismiss me like yesterday's garbage while my daughter fought back tears, I realized something important. I was done trying to fix this. I was done being the punching bag for whatever issues Marcus was working through. And I was definitely done pretending that my presence in their lives was some kind of charitable burden they were graciously accepting. I walked to their front door without another word, my footsteps echoing through their house like a countdown timer. Behind me, I could hear Sarah's voice rising in anger, finally confronting her husband about his behavior. But Marcus's response was just more of the same cold dismissal he'd been serving me for months. The November air hit my face like a wake-up call as I stepped onto their front porch. My truck sat in their driveway, faithfully waiting to take me home to the empty house where at least I could sit in peace without being treated like an unwelcome intruder. But as I drove through the familiar streets of our small town, past the hardware store where I'd bought supplies for countless projects, past the diner where Sarah and I used to have father-daughter breakfasts when she was in high school, I felt something shifting inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh as a paper cut, but underneath it, something harder was forming. Marcus wanted to treat me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience in their lives. He wanted to pretend that the years of support and guidance I'd provided meant absolutely nothing. Fine. If that's how he wanted to play this game, then it was time for him to learn exactly what he was throwing away. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a long moment, staring at the house where I'd raised Sarah after her mother died, where I'd taught her to ride a bike in the backyard and helped her with homework at the kitchen table. This house, and everything else I'd built over the decades, represented more than just money or property. It represented legacy, family, the future I'd always imagined sharing with the people I loved. But love, I was learning, had to be mutual to mean anything. And Marcus had made it crystal clear that whatever I felt for him wasn't reciprocated. Inside my house, I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon and sat at my desk in the home office where I'd handled the paperwork for my business for over 20 years. The wooden filing cabinet in the corner held decades of financial records, tax documents, and legal papers that told the story of everything I'd accomplished, including my will. I pulled out the folder containing my estate planning documents, papers I'd updated just 6 months ago when I'd added Marcus as a beneficiary. Back then, I'd been thinking about family legacy, about making sure Sarah and her husband would be taken care of when I was gone. I'd even included a provision for Marcus to inherit a significant portion of my construction business, thinking he might want to carry on what I'd built. That had been 6 months ago, when Marcus still called me Dad and acted like he valued my presence in his life. Before whatever poison had infected his attitude toward me had taken root and grown into the contempt I'd witnessed tonight. I spread the documents across my desk, like a general planning a campaign, studying each provision with the same careful attention I'd once given to construction blueprints. The will was comprehensive, dividing my assets between Sarah and Marcus in a way that would set them up financially for the rest of their lives. The house, the business, the investment accounts, the life insurance policies, all of it carefully structured to minimize taxes and maximize their inheritance. But wills could be changed, and respect, I was discovering, couldn't be bought or inherited. It had to be earned. I opened my laptop and began researching estate attorneys in the area, looking for someone who could help me make some very important revisions to my financial legacy. Marcus wanted to treat me like I was nobody important, like my opinions and feelings were worthless. Well, he was about to discover exactly how much power this supposedly worthless old man actually possessed. The bourbon burned pleasantly as I scrolled through attorney profiles, taking notes on their specialties and experience levels. I wanted someone thorough, someone who understood the complexities of business succession and family dynamics, someone who could help me craft a document that would deliver a message Marcus would never forget. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dad, I'm so sorry about tonight. Marcus is under a lot of stress at work. Can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at the message for a long moment before setting the phone aside without responding. Sarah meant well, but she'd been making excuses for her husband's behavior for months now. Work stress didn't justify treating people like garbage, and it certainly didn't excuse the pattern of disrespect that had been escalating for weeks. No, this wasn't about work stress or temporary problems. This was about character, about the kind of man Marcus really was when he thought there were no consequences for his actions. And if there was one thing I'd learned in 35 years of business, it It was that people's true nature always revealed itself when they thought they held all the cards. Marcus thought he could treat me however he wanted, because he assumed I'd always be there, always be the supportive father-in-law who swallowed his pride for the sake of family harmony. He thought my love for Sarah meant I'd tolerate any amount of disrespect, rather than risk causing problems in their marriage. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was about that assumption, and the lesson was going to cost him more than he could possibly imagine. The next morning, I called Davidson & Associates, the law firm that had handled my original estate planning. Margaret Davidson answered personally, her voice warm with recognition when I identified myself. "Richard Hayes," she said with genuine pleasure. "It's been, 6 months since we finished your will revisions? What can I help you with today?" "I need to make some changes, Margaret, significant ones. When can we meet?" There was a brief pause, probably while she checked her calendar. "How about Thursday afternoon? 2 o'clock work for you?" "Perfect. And Margaret, I want to discuss setting up a trust structure. Something with very specific conditions attached. Of course. Should I prepare any particular documentation in advance?" I leaned back in my desk chair, looking out at the morning light filtering through my kitchen window. "Just pull up my current will. We're going to be rewriting substantial portions of it." After hanging up, I spent the rest of the morning going through old photo albums, something I hadn't done in years. There was Sarah's high school graduation, me beaming with pride as she accepted her diploma. Her college graduation, where I'd driven 8 hours to watch her walk across that stage. Her wedding day, where I'd walked her down the aisle and welcomed Marcus into our family with genuine happiness. In every photo from that wedding, Marcus looked genuinely grateful. His speech at the reception had included a heartfelt thank you to me for raising such an incredible daughter and for accepting him as a son. He'd even teared up when he talked about how much it meant to have a father figure in his life again after losing his own dad in college. What had changed? When had genuine gratitude turned into this bitter resentment that poisoned every interaction between us? My phone rang, interrupting my trip down memory lane. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Dad?" Her voice was strained, exhausted. "I wanted to apologize again for last night. Marcus feels terrible about how things went." "Does he?" I asked quietly, because he seemed pretty comfortable with his behavior when it was happening. "He's been under enormous pressure at work. The Henderson project isn't going well, and his boss has been breathing down his neck for weeks. I know that's not an excuse, but—" "Sarah," I interrupted gently. "Sweetheart, when has work stress ever made me treat your mother with disrespect? When has it made me insult guests in our home?" The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally she spoke, her voice small and uncertain. "This is different, Dad. You don't understand the kind of pressure he's facing." "Different how?" I kept my tone calm, but something cold was spreading through my chest. "Are you saying his career problems justify treating me like garbage in front of you?" "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Sarah's voice carried a note of desperation. "He loves you, Dad. He's just going through a rough patch. People who love you don't treat you the way Marcus treated me last night. They don't dismiss your existence or tell you that you're not family. They don't make you feel unwelcome in their home after you've done nothing but support them." I could hear Sarah crying softly on the other end of the line, and it broke my heart. But not enough to back down from what needed to be said. "Honey," I continued more gently, "I've been making excuses for his behavior for months. We both have. But last night crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. So what are you saying?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Are you cutting us out of your life?" "I'm saying that respect has to go both ways in a relationship. I'm saying that I won't be treated like an unwanted burden by someone I've tried to love as my own son." The conversation ended with promises to talk more later, but we both knew something fundamental had shifted. Sarah was caught in the middle of a war she didn't start and couldn't end, and my heart ached for her. But my sympathy for her situation couldn't override the reality of what Marcus had revealed about his true feelings. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in a blur of research and preparation. I pulled together 5 years' worth of financial records documenting every penny I'd contributed to Marcus and Sarah's life together. The mortgage co-signing when his credit wasn't quite good enough. The down payment assistance that had made their dream home possible. The emergency loans when Marcus was between jobs. the wedding contribution that had turned their modest ceremony into the celebration Sarah had always dreamed of. The numbers were staggering when I added them all together. Nearly $200,000 over 5 years, not counting the countless hours of free labor I'd provided when they needed home repairs or improvements. Money I'd given freely, happily, because I thought I was investing in family. But family, I was learning, was more than shared blood or legal documents. Family was about mutual respect, about treating each other with dignity even when times got tough. And by that definition, Marcus had never really been family at all. Thursday afternoon, I sat across from Margaret Davidson in her oak-paneled office, watching her review my current will with professional thoroughness. The afternoon sun slanted through her windows, casting long shadows across the legal documents that would soon be substantially different. "So, Richard," she said finally, looking up from the papers, "you want to remove Marcus entirely as a beneficiary and restructure Sarah's inheritance with specific conditions. Can you walk me through your reasoning?" I told her everything. The months of escalating disrespect, the dinner conversation that had finally pushed me over the edge, the pattern of taking my support for granted while treating me like an unwelcome stranger. Margaret listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. "What kind of conditions are you thinking about for Sarah's portion?" she asked when I finished. "I want her inheritance structured so that Marcus can never access or control any of it. If they divorce, he gets nothing. If something happens to Sarah, the money goes to a charity of my choosing, not to him." "That's certainly doable. We can set up a trust that provides Sarah with income and principal access while keeping Marcus completely excluded. What about your business assets? Those were going to Marcus in the current will, right? The construction company, the equipment, the client contracts?" Margaret nodded, flipping through the documents. "Yes, you designated him as your successor with the idea that he might want to continue the business." "Change it. Everything goes to my foreman, Tony Martinez. He's been with me for 15 years, knows the business inside and out, and actually appreciates what I've built." Margaret was writing rapidly now, capturing the major changes I wanted to implement. "What about the house?" I thought about that for a long moment, picturing the home where I'd raised Sarah, where she'd learned to walk and talk and become the woman I was so proud of. The house held decades of memories, but it also represented something else now. A symbol of the legacy I'd worked my entire life to build. Sarah can have the house, but with the same restrictions. Marcus gets no claim to it, ever. If they divorce, she keeps it. If she dies first, it goes to charity. We spent another hour working through the details, crafting language that would make my intentions absolutely clear while protecting Sarah's interests. When we finished, Margaret leaned back in her chair with a satisfied expression. "This is comprehensive, Richard. Are you absolutely certain about these changes? Once we execute the new will, there's no going back without another formal revision." I thought about Marcus's face at dinner Sunday night, the cold contempt in his eyes when he'd told me we weren't family. I thought about years of trying to earn respect from someone who'd apparently never had any to give. "I'm certain," I said firmly. "How long until everything's finalized?" "I can have the new documents ready by next week. We'll need witnesses for the signing, but my staff can handle that." "Perfect. And Margaret, I want to add one more provision. I want a letter to be read to both Sarah and Marcus when the will is executed. Something that explains exactly why these changes were made." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "We can certainly include a personal letter with your final wishes and explanations." As I drove home that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. A sense of control, of taking action, instead of simply enduring whatever treatment Marcus felt like dishing out. The will changes were just the beginning of a plan that would teach both of them exactly what they'd taken for granted. My phone buzzed with another text from Sarah, asking if we could have dinner this weekend to talk things through. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back a response. "Sunday dinner at my house, both of you, 7 o'clock sharp." It was time for Marcus to learn that actions had consequences, and the lesson was going to be more expensive than he could possibly imagine. The week leading up to Sunday dinner crawled by like a wounded animal. Every day brought new text messages from Sarah, alternating between apologies and attempts to smooth things over. Marcus, predictably, remained silent. No apology, no acknowledgement of his behavior, nothing but the same arrogant assumption that I'd eventually just forget about the whole thing and go back to being his convenient doormat. But I wasn't the same man who'd walked out of their dining room a week ago. That version of myself had died somewhere between Margaret Davidson's office and the moment I signed my name to documents that would reshape everything Marcus thought he knew about his future. I spent those days putting my affairs in order with the methodical precision of a man preparing for war. Phone calls to my accountant about restructuring certain investments, meetings with Tony Martinez about gradually transitioning more responsibility to him at the construction company, conversations with my financial advisor about setting up the charitable foundations that would eventually receive the bulk of my estate. Each decision felt like removing another piece from the chessboard Marcus didn't even know we were playing. He'd treated me like I was powerless, like I was some doddering old fool who existed solely to provide financial support without expecting basic human decency in return. The irony was delicious. In his arrogance, he'd declared war on the one person who actually held all the power in this relationship. Saturday evening, I prepared for what would likely be the last family dinner we'd ever share. I chose the menu carefully, making Sarah's favorite pot roast with the seasoning blend her mother had taught me 30 years ago. Mashed potatoes with real butter, green beans from my own garden, dinner rolls from the bakery downtown where Sarah used to pick out birthday cakes as a little girl. If this was going to be our goodbye, I wanted Sarah to remember that her father had never stopped loving her, even when circumstances forced me to make choices that would break both our hearts. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Through the peephole, I could see them standing on my front porch, Sarah fidgeting with her purse strap while Marcus stared off into the distance with that same cold expression he'd perfected over the past few months. Even coming to apologize, he couldn't manage to look interested in being here. I opened the door and stepped aside to let them in. Sarah immediately wrapped me in a hug that felt desperate, like she was trying to hold our family together through sheer force of will. "Dad, thank you for inviting us. I know this hasn't been easy." Marcus brushed past us without a word, already making his way toward the dining room like he owned the place. Some things apparently never changed. "Dinner smells amazing," Sarah continued, her voice bright with forced cheerfulness. "Is that Mom's pot roast recipe?" "The very same," I replied, leading them toward the kitchen where I'd set the table with my best china. "I thought we should use the good dishes tonight." Marcus was already seated when we entered the dining room, his phone out, scrolling through what looked like work emails. He didn't even glance up when Sarah and I joined him at the table. "Marcus," Sarah's voice carried a warning edge, "put the phone away. We're having dinner." He looked up with barely concealed irritation. "I'm waiting for an important email about the Henderson project. This will just take a second." The Henderson project again. The same excuse he'd used for his behavior last week. I served the pot roast in silence, watching him tap away at his screen while the food I'd spent hours preparing grew cold on his plate. "So," I said finally, settling into my chair at the head of the table, "I'm glad you both could make it tonight. We have some important things to discuss." That got Marcus's attention. His eyes flicked up from his phone, studying my face with the wariness of a man who sensed trouble but couldn't quite identify the source. "Dad's right," Sarah said quickly. "We need to clear the air about what happened last week. Marcus has something he wants to say to you." I looked at Marcus expectantly, waiting for the apology Sarah had obviously coached him to deliver. But the seconds stretched on, and he just stared back at me with that familiar mixture of resentment and barely contained hostility. "Well?" Sarah prompted, her voice tight with embarrassment. Marcus set down his phone with deliberate slowness, like he was preparing for battle. "Look, Richard, maybe I was a little harsh last Sunday, but you have to understand the pressure I'm under at work right now. The Henderson deal is worth millions to the firm, and if it falls through—" "Stop!" The word came out sharper than I intended, cutting through his excuse-making like a blade through silk. "Just stop talking." Both Sarah and Marcus froze, clearly not expecting that response. Sarah's eyes went wide with alarm, while Marcus's face darkened with anger. "Excuse me?" Marcus's voice carried that dangerous edge I'd heard before, the tone of a man who wasn't used to being interrupted. "I said stop talking," I repeated, my voice calm despite the fire building in my chest. "I've listened to your excuses for months now, Marcus. Work stress, project deadlines, pressure from your boss, all very convenient explanations for why you think it's acceptable to treat me like garbage in my own daughter's home." "Dad?" Sarah started, but I held up a hand to silence her. "No, sweetheart. I've tried being patient. I've tried making excuses for his behavior just like you have. But some things can't be excused away, and disrespect is one of them. Marcus leaned forward, his jaw clenched tight. Disrespect. You want to talk about disrespect? How about showing up uninvited to family dinners and expecting us to entertain you? How about giving unsolicited advice about things you don't understand? How about acting like you're entitled to be part of every conversation and every decision in our lives? The accusation hung in the air like smoke, revealing the depth of resentment Marcus had been harboring. Sarah gasped audibly, her face going pale as she realized what her husband had just admitted. Uninvited, I repeated quietly. Marcus, this is my daughter. I raised her in this house after her mother died. I don't need an invitation to have dinner with my own child. She's not a child anymore, Marcus shot back. She's a married woman with her own family now, and that family doesn't include you as some permanent fixture we have to manage around. The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to cut deep and draw blood. But instead of the hurt I expected to feel, something cold and calculating settled over me. This was it. This was Marcus showing his true colors, revealing exactly what he thought of me and my place in their lives. I see, I said, my voice steady as stone. So everything I've done for you both over the past 5 years, all the support and help and financial assistance, that was just me being a burden you had to manage around. Marcus's eyes flashed with something that might have been triumph. Finally, you're starting to get it. Yes, Richard, you've been a burden. All that unsolicited help, all those checks you insisted on writing, all those times you swooped in to solve problems we never asked you to solve. Did you ever think that maybe we didn't want your help? That maybe we wanted to handle our own lives without your constant interference? Sarah was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she watched her husband systematically destroy any pretense of family harmony. But Marcus wasn't finished. He was on a roll, finally letting out years of accumulated resentment. And the worst part, he continued, his voice rising with emotion, is that you act like we should be grateful, like we owe you something because you chose to insert yourself into our lives. Well, newsflash, old man. We don't owe you anything. Not gratitude, not respect, not even basic politeness if that's not what we feel like giving. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Sarah stared at her husband like she'd never seen him before, her face a mixture of horror and disbelief. I set down my fork carefully, the small clink against the china unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. When I looked up, both of them were watching me with completely different expressions. Sarah looked terrified of what I might say or do. Marcus looked satisfied, like he'd finally gotten something off his chest that had been bothering him for years. Thank you, I said quietly. They both blinked in confusion. That clearly wasn't the response either of them had expected. Thank you for finally being honest about how you really feel, I continued, my voice calm and measured. For months I've been trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, what I could do differently to repair our relationship. But you've just made it crystal clear that there never was a real relationship to repair. Marcus's satisfaction began to fade, replaced by wariness as he sensed the shift in my demeanor. You see, Marcus, I spent 5 years believing we were family. I thought that meant something to you, the way it meant something to me. I thought the support I provided came with mutual respect and basic human decency. But you've just explained that I was wrong about all of that. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You called my help interference. You called my presence a burden. You said you don't owe me gratitude or respect or even basic politeness. Well, congratulations. You're about to get exactly what you asked for. What do you mean? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I walked to my desk in the corner of the dining room and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with legal documents. The sound of papers rustling seemed unnaturally loud as I returned to the table. This, I said, setting the envelope down between us, is my new will, executed and witnessed just this afternoon. Marcus's face went white. Sarah looked like she might be sick. In the old version, you were both primary beneficiaries. The house, the business, the investments, everything I'd worked my entire life to build. I'd planned to leave it all to you because I thought we were family. I opened the envelope and pulled out the top document, letting them see the official letterhead and legal formatting that made it unmistakably real. But family, as you've just explained, requires mutual respect. It requires people who actually want to be connected to each other. And since you've made it clear that's not what this is, I've made some adjustments." Marcus found his voice first. "What kind of adjustments?" I smiled, and for the first time in months it felt completely genuine. The kind that reflect reality instead of my foolish assumptions about what we meant to each other. The papers lay spread across the dinner table like tarot cards predicting their future, and that future looked very different than anything they'd imagined when they walked through my door an hour ago. "What exactly does that mean, Dad?" Sarah's voice shook as she reached for the documents, but I gently moved them away from her grasp. "It does. It means that Marcus just gave me the most honest conversation we've ever had," I replied, settling back into my chair with the kind of calm that comes from finally understanding exactly where you stand. "He's explained that my financial support over the years wasn't appreciated family assistance, it was unwanted interference. He's clarified that my presence at family gatherings isn't welcomed, it's tolerated. Most importantly, he's made it clear that respect and gratitude aren't things he feels obligated to provide." Marcus was staring at the legal documents like they might burst into flames. His earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by the dawning realization that his honesty might have cost him more than he'd bargained for. "So I've simply adjusted my estate planning to reflect those realities," I continued, picking up the first page of the will and scanning it like I was reading a grocery list. "Why would I leave my life's work to someone who considers it a burden to have a relationship with me?" "Dad, please," Sarah was crying harder now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Marcus didn't mean what he said. He's been under so much pressure lately and—" "Sarah, stop." I set the document down and looked at my daughter with all the love I'd carried for her since the day she was born. "Honey, your husband just spent 10 minutes explaining exactly what he thinks of me and my place in your lives. Those weren't words spoken in anger or stress. Those were truths he's been holding back for years." I gestured toward Marcus, who sat frozen in his chair like a deer caught in headlights. "Look at him, sweetheart. He's not denying what he said. He's not apologizing for the cruelty of it. He's just worried about what it's going to cost him." The accuracy of that observation hit home immediately. Marcus's face flushed red, but he couldn't seem to form words to defend himself. Because we all knew I was right. His concern wasn't about the relationship he'd just destroyed or the pain he'd caused. It was about the financial implications of his honesty. "The construction business," I said, flipping through the pages, "was going to Marcus in the old will. I figured he might want to continue what I'd built, maybe even expand it. But why would I leave a company to someone who thinks my life's work is just meddlesome interference?" Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "Richard, you can't be serious about this." "Oh, I'm completely serious," I replied, enjoying the way his face went even paler. "Tony Martinez has been with me for 15 years. He knows every client, every supplier, every aspect of the business. More importantly, he actually appreciates what we've built together. The company goes to him now." "That's not fair," Marcus sputtered, his composure cracking completely. "I'm family. Sarah is your daughter. You can't just—" "Can't what?" I interrupted. "Can't make decisions about my own money and property? Can't choose who receives the benefits of my life's work? Marcus, you just spent the last 10 minutes explaining that I have no real place in your family. Why would you expect to have a place in my will?" Sarah was sobbing openly now, her hands pressed against her face as the full scope of the situation began to dawn on her. "How much?" she whispered through her tears. "How much are we talking about?" I pulled out a summary sheet Margaret Davidson had prepared, the numbers laid out in neat columns that represented decades of hard work and careful investing. "The business is valued at approximately $2.8 million. The house is worth another $400,000. Investment accounts, life insurance, retirement funds, various other assets." I paused, letting the magnitude sink in. Total estate value is just over $4 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence, transforming the entire dynamic of our conversation. Marcus looked like he might faint. Sarah's crying had stopped abruptly, replaced by stunned silence as she tried to process what I'd just revealed. "$4 million?" Marcus's voice came out as a strangled whisper. Give or take, depending on market fluctuations, I confirmed. Not bad for a man whose help you considered unwanted interference. I could see the wheels turning in Marcus's head, the rapid mental calculation of what he'd just thrown away with his moment of brutal honesty. $4 million was more money than he'd see in a lifetime of working at his law firm. It was generational wealth, the kind of inheritance that could transform not just their lives, but their children's lives and their children's children. And he'd just talked himself out of every penny of it. Now, Sarah still inherits, I continued, watching relief flood across my daughter's face, but with some very specific conditions that I think you'll both find interesting. I pulled out another document, this one several pages thick with dense legal language. Her inheritance is structured through a trust that ensures Marcus can never access or control any portion of it. The money provides Sarah with a comfortable income for life, but it can't be used to subsidize anyone else's lifestyle. Marcus's relief at hearing Sarah would still inherit evaporated instantly. What do you mean I can't access it? Exactly what I said. The trust is designed to provide for Sarah's needs and wants, but the principal remains protected from any claims by spouses or creditors. If you two divorce Marcus, you walk away with nothing. If something happens to Sarah before the trust is exhausted, the remaining funds go to charity. The implications of that arrangement were clearly sinking in for Marcus. He'd married a woman whose father was worth $4 million, and he'd just ensured that he'd never see a dime of it. His face had gone from pale to gray, and I could see a thin sheen of sweat forming on his forehead. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising with panic. "You can't punish Sarah because of what I said." "I'm not punishing Sarah," I replied calmly. "I'm protecting her. I'm making sure that if her marriage fails, she won't be left with nothing because her husband had access to her inheritance. I'm ensuring that the money I worked my entire life to accumulate actually benefits my daughter, not someone who thinks providing that money was burdensome interference." Sarah was staring at the trust documents like they were written in a foreign language. "Dad, this is too much. I never expected. I knew you had money saved, but $4 million? Your mother and I lived modestly, sweetheart. We saved and invested carefully. The construction business did better than either of us ever dreamed it would. I always planned to leave it all to you because I wanted you to have security, to know that no matter what happened in life, you'd be taken care of." I looked directly at Marcus as I continued. "But security isn't just about money, is it? It's about being surrounded by people who love and respect you. And your husband has made it very clear that respect isn't something he's willing to provide." Marcus was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles had turned white. "Richard, I was angry. People say things they don't mean when they're angry. You can't make permanent decisions based on one conversation." "One conversation?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus, this wasn't one conversation. This was months of building resentment finally coming to the surface. This was you revealing what you really think of me when you thought there wouldn't be any consequences." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where I'd taught Sarah to throw a baseball when she was 7 years old. The memory felt bittersweet now, knowing that the little girl who'd hung on my every word had grown up to marry a man who thought her father was nothing more than an inconvenient burden. "The truth is, Marcus, I'm grateful for tonight," I said without turning around. "For months I've been questioning myself, wondering what I'd done wrong to earn your contempt. I've been bending over backward trying to repair a relationship I thought was worth saving. But you've just shown me that there never was a relationship worth saving in the first place." When I turned back to face them, Marcus was staring at his hands while Sarah looked like she was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. The elegant dinner I'd prepared sat mostly untouched on their plates, growing cold while our family fell apart in real time. "The house," Sarah said suddenly. "What about the house?" "Your house?" I asked. "The one I co-signed for when your husband's credit wasn't quite good enough? The one I helped with the down payment when you were short on funds?" She nodded, fresh tears starting to form in her eyes. "Well, that's an interesting situation," I said, pulling out yet another document from my seemingly endless supply of legal papers. "You see, when someone co-signs a mortgage, they become legally responsible for the debt. And when that same person has been making supplemental payments to help ensure the mortgage stays current." I trailed off, letting them draw their own conclusions. Marcus's head snapped up. "What are you saying?" I'm saying that I've been contributing $1,500 a month to your mortgage payments for the past 3 years. Did you think your salaries were covering that $4,000 monthly payment on their own?" The color drained from both their faces as they realized what I was implying. They'd been living in a house they couldn't actually afford, subsidized by the man Marcus had just finished insulting and dismissing. "But that's not the most interesting part," I continued, clearly enjoying their growing panic. "The most interesting part is that I've decided to stop making those supplemental payments, effective immediately." Sarah's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Dad, we can't afford the full mortgage payment on our own." "I know," I replied simply. "That's rather the point, isn't it?" Marcus finally seemed to grasp the full scope of what was happening. His earlier anger had been completely replaced by fear, as he realized that his moment of honesty was going to cost him not just his inheritance, but potentially his home as well. "You can't do this," he said, his voice shaking. "We have a contract. You're legally obligated to—" "I'm legally obligated to ensure the mortgage gets paid," I interrupted, "but nothing says I have to pay more than my required share. If you can't cover the difference, that sounds like a problem you'll need to solve. Maybe you can ask someone who isn't a burdensome interference for help." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Marcus had spent years taking my financial support for granted while simultaneously resenting my presence in their lives. Now he was about to discover exactly what life looked like without that support, and the lesson was going to be expensive. Sarah was crying again, but these weren't the tears of emotional pain from earlier. These were the tears of someone who was beginning to understand the financial catastrophe that was about to engulf her life. "Dad, please," she begged. "I know Marcus said terrible things, but we can work through this. We're still family." I sat back down across from her, my heart breaking at the desperation in her voice. "Sweetheart, I love you more than life itself. That will never change. But love doesn't mean accepting abuse. It doesn't mean allowing someone to treat me like garbage just because they married into the family." I gestured toward Marcus, who was staring at the table like he might find answers in the wood grain. "Your husband has made it clear that he doesn't respect me, doesn't appreciate my help, and doesn't want me as a meaningful part of your lives. I'm simply giving him exactly what he asked for." "But the money, the house, everything we've built together," Sarah protested. "You haven't built anything together, honey. I've been building it while you've been living in it. There's a difference." The harsh truth of that statement seemed to hit her like a physical blow. For the first time, she was seeing their lifestyle through clear eyes, recognizing how much of their comfortable existence had been subsidized by the man her husband had just finished attacking. Marcus finally looked up from the table, his face a mixture of desperation and calculation. "What would it take?" he asked quietly. "What would what take?" "To change your mind. To go back to the old will. What would it take for you to forgive this and move forward?" I studied his face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse or understanding. But all I saw was a man trying to negotiate his way out of the consequences of his actions, someone more concerned about the money than the relationship he'd destroyed. "Marcus," I said slowly, "do you even understand what you did wrong tonight?" He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly struggling to find words that might salvage the situation. The silence stretched on until it became uncomfortable, highlighting his inability to grasp the depth of his betrayal. "That's what I thought," I said finally. "You're not sorry for what you said or how you said it. You're sorry that it's going to cost you $4 million, and that, son, is exactly why there's no going back from this." I gathered up the legal documents and returned them to their envelope, the sound of rustling papers seeming unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. "Dinner's over," I announced, standing up from the table. "I think it's time for you both to go home and start figuring out how you're going to manage your lives without my burdensome interference." As they prepared to leave, Sarah turned back one last time, her face streaked with tears and desperate hope. "Dad, I love you. Please don't let this destroy our relationship." "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, my voice gentle despite the hardness in my heart. "But some things can't be unsaid, and some actions can't be undone. Your husband made a choice tonight, and now you both get to live with the consequences." The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving me alone in my dining room with the remnants of what had been intended as a reconciliation dinner. The pot roast sat congealing on their abandoned plates, a perfect metaphor for the family relationships that had just died at my kitchen table. But as I cleared the dishes and put away the good china, I didn't feel the sadness I'd expected. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a deep sense of relief. The pretending was over. The walking on eggshells was finished. For the first time in years, I was free to be myself without worrying about whether it would offend someone who'd never really wanted me around in the first place. My phone rang as I finished loading the dishwasher. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. By the fourth call, I simply turned it off and poured myself a glass of the good bourbon I'd been saving for a special occasion. This seemed special enough. After all, it wasn't every day a man discovered exactly what his life was worth to the people he'd been supporting. $4 million, apparently. And Marcus had just talked himself out of every penny of it. Outside, I could hear their car doors slamming, followed by the sound of Marcus's engine starting with more force than necessary. Through my front window, I watched their headlights sweep across my driveway as they backed out, probably heading home to figure out exactly how deep the financial hole they'd just dug really was. The bourbon burned pleasantly as it went down, warming my chest in a way that had nothing to do with alcohol and everything to do with finally standing up for myself. I walked through my house, turning off lights and straightening cushions, performing the small rituals of a man who was truly alone for the first time in years. But instead of loneliness, I felt something approaching peace. My phone, still turned off, sat silent on the kitchen counter like a sleeping snake. I knew that when I eventually turned it back on, there would be dozens of messages. Sarah crying and pleading. Maybe even Marcus, once he'd calculated exactly what his honesty had cost him. But those conversations could wait. Tonight was about letting the reality of their new situation sink in. The next morning brought clarity along with the sunrise. I made coffee using the expensive beans I'd stopped buying when Marcus started making comments about my wasteful spending habits. Funny how quickly those old restrictions fell away once you stopped caring about someone else's approval. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 23 text messages when I finally powered it back on. Sarah's messages told a predictable story of escalating panic as the full scope of their situation became clear. "Dad, please call me. We need to talk about this." "Marcus is sorry. He didn't mean what he said." "The mortgage payment is due next week. We can't cover it without your help." "Dad, I'm begging you. Don't do this to us." I set the phone aside without responding and opened my laptop instead. Margaret Davidson had sent the final copies of my new will, along with the trust documents that would govern Sarah's inheritance. Everything was legally bulletproof, crafted with the precision of someone who understood exactly how bitter family disputes could become. But there was one more element to add to my plan, something that would drive home the lesson Marcus needed to learn about consequences. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized years ago but never thought I'd use. "Henderson Development, this is Patricia speaking." "Patricia, this is Richard Hayes from Hayes Construction. I need to speak with Mr. Henderson about the commercial project Marcus Sterling has been handling for your company." There was a brief pause, probably while she checked her calendar or tried to figure out why a construction contractor was calling about their legal affairs. "Mr. Henderson is in meetings most of the day, but I could have him return your call. May I ask what this is regarding?" "It's about some concerns I have regarding Mr. Sterling's handling of your account. I think Mr. Henderson would want to hear what I have to say." "Hold on just a moment, Mr. Hayes. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come with the highest price tags. Marcus learned that respect isn't something you can take for granted, especially when it comes from the person funding your lifestyle. $4 million might seem like a steep tuition for a masterclass in humility, but some education is worth every penny. As I always told Sarah when she was growing up, actions have consequences, and the bills always come due eventually.